What the fuck? The game? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Welcome everyone to episode 2 of Let's Learn with Limbic, the show where I analyze my replays in order to identify the mistakes that I made so that we can both learn from them. Today my opponent is a Zerg player named Serial. Now the reason that I picked this game is I think it's a good example of a game that is either won or lost at a not so obvious time. What I mean by this is usually in a game people assume that a game is either won or lost in the last big battle. But quite often this is not the case. Usually a game is determined long before that big battle. Usually one player will make a mistake big enough so that the game is put into an unrecoverable state, and it's just a matter of time of waiting for their opponent to kill them. And this is the moment that is actually valuable when analyzing your replays. You want to find out what you did that made you actually lose the game so that hopefully in the future you can avoid repeating the same mistakes. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is skip to 6 minutes into the replay. The reason for this is unless either A, somebody cheeses in the game, or B, you're trying to learn a new build and you want to make sure that you got it right, there's actually no reason to watch the first few minutes of a game. There's no reason to waste time watching you build workers. In this game, nobody cheesed anyone, and I'm pretty confident I have my build down nice and solidly, so there's no reason to watch that over again. There's nothing valuable to learn there. Usually, most players will skip to somewhere between 6 and 8 minutes. I think it's really a personal preference thing. I like to skip to 6, play a little more conservatively, make sure I see everything noteworthy. Once again, it is up to you. If you feel like nothing of significance happened until really late in your game, feel free to skip to 8 minutes. So as you can see here, I just opened up with the Reaper Expand. I'm just messing around, seeing if there's anything useful I can see in my opponent's base. Maybe try to get a drone. Unfortunately don't succeed at that, and get chased away by some Zerglings. I start producing Hellions, and as you can see, this is just a very standard game. Speaking of standard, for those of you who do not know your timings, I'll tell you one right here. In a Zerg versus Terran, the normal time for a Zerg to take their third base is between 6 minutes and 6 minutes 30 seconds. If they take it earlier than that, that means that they're probably playing a little greedy. If they take it later than that, that means that they are probably planning to do something a little aggressive. Now you might be thinking, oh, well, it's 7 minutes in the game and my opponent has not taken their third base yet. That means they're doing something aggressive, right? And in fact, that's what I thought too when playing this game. But I'm going to demonstrate something to you here. I'm 99% convinced that this is completely unintentional from my opponent. You can see he has the drone at his third base at 6 minutes 30 seconds. He has more than enough money to build a hatchery, and he just doesn't. I'm pretty convinced that he was just focused and distracted by these Hellions. And he gets his hatchery down much later as a consequence of that. I'm pretty sure he meant to get it down at 6 minutes 30 seconds. Unfortunately for me, I scout that this hatchery is a little late and immediately assume, oh crap, you're doing something aggressive. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how it affected me this game and what I could have done in order to not be so foolish and in assessing what my opponent was doing. So here I'm trying to just be a little annoying with my Hellions, make sure that he doesn't plant any creep tumors up here. Maybe if I get really lucky I can pick off a queen. Queens are always really great to pick off if you can by the Hellions. And I'm just trying to make sure that he doesn't do anything too crazy. Now I'm sending my Hellions and Reaper over to the third base to check the timing of it. And I see, oh my gosh, it should be either about done or done by now. It was late. You must be doing something aggressive. You're going to see that I'm going to scan my opponent's base relatively soon. The reason why that's significant is for every scan you use, that is a mule that you will never get to use. In other words, a scan in essence costs a Terran 270 minerals because that's how much a mule will harvest in its lifetime, and that's 270 minerals that you will never get. So scans are a really hefty investment. You want to use them as sparsely as possible. But here I am sufficiently freaked out that I decide, you know what, I absolutely must know what my opponent is up to. As we can see here, he's actually just playing out pretty normally. He has a Baneling Nest, which is basically just for defense. He's getting up his double Evo chambers in order to get his 1/1 upgrades. I believe these are a little late, but hey, we're not really focusing on my opponent. We're focusing on me and the mistakes I made. He starts mutating into a lair. Again, perfectly standard to mutate into a lair at this time. And I'd like to just reiterate, he's basically just playing standard. However, I think that I need to be worried about some big attack coming. You can see here I'm just trying to keep the creep spread under as much control as possible. Creep is massively important in Terran vs. Zerg because of the movement speed it gives to Zerglings and Banelings. It allows Zerglings to get surround much more easily on the opponent, and it allows Banelings to connect with the enemy army much more easily than they would off of creep. Okay, so I scan my opponent's base. I see 2 evolution chambers, a Baneling Nest, and a lair. This should have said to me, oh, okay, you're not doing anything aggressive. What I instead think is, Baneling Nest? This must be a Roach Bane all-in. This is silly at this point. I should know that off of 4 gas geysers, these 2 he hasn't even taken yet, there's no way a Zerg player will have enough gas for both 1/1 upgrades, a lair, Banelings, and Roaches. It's just not possible. So I should be thinking to myself now, oh, I guess you're just playing standard. I guess this hatchery was late due to just human error, basically. I don't do that. I assume this must be a Roach Baneling all-in. So I decide I'm going to run my Hellions by into the natural, maybe kill a few drones, and see the Roach Warren you are probably hiding here. Again, I don't want to use another scan here, because that is another hefty investment, and especially if you're going to be defending against a big attack, you want to have as much money as possible so you can build as many defenses as possible. And against Roaches, Hellions are not really that useful anyway, because they do so little damage. So if you are aware that your opponent is going for some kind of Roach-based attack, it might be a good idea to try to run your Hellions by, see if you can kill any drones, basically sacrifice them, and in turn delay your opponent's push. You're getting rid of the units that are not really going to help much in your defense anyway, in order to slow your opponent down significantly and give you more time to build more defenses and prepare yourself better. That's what I thought I was doing in this game. That would make sense. Unfortunately, once again, I should have known that my opponent was not up to anything sneaky. They were just playing standard, and that I should not be worried. I should just try to play normal as well. So I do try to run these Hellions by. Unfortunately, I run them up this ramp. This is unbelievably stupid. Do you see how tiny this ramp is? That means that the Hellions are going to basically funnel, almost go single file up the ramp. That means that they'll move by much more slowly. That means that these queens that are sitting at the top of the ramp will have much more time to shoot at them. Hell, these queens could even just basically stand up here and block the Hellions from entering completely. And it also means that any acceptable amount of Zerglings that my opponent would have, which is I'd say about 15 or 20 at this point, which is just what a Zerg builds for defense, would easily be able to clean up these Hellions before they saw anything incriminating or managed to do any damage. Unfortunately, I'm a goofball and I decide, you know what, I'm going to try and run them up here anyway, and just watch how that goes for me. Marvelous. I believe he lost 3 Banelings there, and I lost 6 Hellions. That is by no means a fair trade. I basically just threw those Hellions away. Now, while Hellions are not amazing in head-on engagements, they are certainly useful, and they are certainly not something to just be ignored. There's going to be an engagement that I take a little further on, and I want you to just imagine, once that happens, what if I had those 6 Hellions instead of just throwing them away for basically nothing in return? So we'll go ahead and just We're actually going to fast forward until that happens because there's nothing interesting to see until then. Once my medevacs pop out, that's when I decide to move out. That is a very useful tidbit of information, by the way. If you're playing Terran against Zerg, you should almost always, move out of your base and to the opponent's base once your medevacs pop out. The reason is your medevacs make your army a whole lot more effective, and if anything goes horribly wrong, you can always, of course, load them up and get out of there. You want to have an army at your opponent's side of the map as soon as possible because you want to keep their creep under control. I'm going to give you a little bit of a rule for Terran versus Zerg. Never, ever, 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 ever engage a Zerg on the creep. I'm going to repeat that again just to make sure it's in your heads. Never, ever engage a Zerg player on the creep, unless you've basically won already. And even then, you really shouldn't do it because then you might just end up throwing it away. It makes the Zerg units so much more effective. It makes Banelings have such a much more easy... Wow. Words. Okay. It makes the Banelings have a much easier time connecting with your army and evaporating your units and making you feel very sad. You should always make sure that you are either off of the creep or just barely on the creep, and then once you see the units coming, you can step off and take engagements off of creep. You will see my little rule disobeyed by me in the next upcoming minutes. Watch. Not only do I go onto the creep, but I go really deep onto the creep. Look how much, if I decided I needed to retreat, look how much creep I'd have to go over in order to get away. This means that the Speedlings and the Banelings are chasing me for this entire duration and are probably going to, my units are probably going to get surrounded by the Speedlings and get trapped. Never, ever, ever, ever engage a Zerg player on creep. You should just wait at the edge of the creep, be patient, just rally your units to your main army in order to keep growing its strength, continually scanning, moving just a small pack of units forward to kill the creep tumors until your opponent is forced to engage you. That way you have basically the defender's advantage because they're attacking you even though you're on their side of the map. You have your widow mines all nice and set up, you hopefully have your units split properly, and it's just a much easier, you'll have a much easier time winning fights if you do that as Terran. I don't do that. I step way onto creep, I don't have my units pre-split, I'm about to get owned. And this is the moment that I lost the game. So as you can see here, I stim, he micros pretty decently against the widow mines. You can see that even though my splits here were decent, it doesn't matter. I engaged on creep, I got hit by a Baneling that weakened and softened up my army, and then even though I micro, I'd say pretty well against the Banelings after, and managed to even get a few units off of creep, it doesn't matter. He can just really easily clean up these very softened units with his Speedlings. Once again, this is a moment where I lost the game, and it might not be so obvious why this game is now over. The reason is it's basically Terran's job in this matchup to be at the opponent's side of the map constantly, be right on the edge of the creep, knocking at their door, threatening to kill them at any moment. Once that is no longer the case, once Terran's forced to defend, or they no longer have an army to attack with anyway, you can see here I have 5 Marines and 5 medevacs. Imagine all the work I can get done with that. Zerg is free to expand their creep as far as they want, they're free to take extra bases much more safely, they're free to just really get the party rolling and build themselves up to a position where they can just steamroll you and make it look like you are the worst player in the world and that they're amazing. So we're just going to see this game kind of spiral out of control from here. Watch what he does. So he starts spreading his creep out again, which is good, and he takes a 4th base. This is a pretty early 4th base, and you know what? He knows that there's probably nothing I can do about it. I'm going to be sitting back at home trying to get back up a decently sized army so that I can actually do something with it, and he's going to probably be able to get this base up safe and sound. In fact, he is so confident that he is defended enough and that I will not be able to pressure him that he even takes a 5th base. This is an unbelievably early 5th base. Here you'll kind of see what I like to call just the nail in the coffin. This game is already over, but this basically just rubs salt in the wound. Here I am out in the middle of the map with not that big of an army, and I just micro this terribly. Not only am I backed up against the wall, which means that I can't really retreat very easily, but again, I just micro so terribly. I keep my units nice and clumped up for him so that he can eviscerate them with his banelings easily. Even though this is off of creep, this should be a good fight for me, but it's not. And you will see why. Ready? Do you see these Marines here? All clumped up. This is basically a baneling's dream here, to see Marines like this. Sure, I pull some Marines off here, but I actually pull them so far to the side that they're not in range to shoot at anything. This is basically what I like to call anti-micro, and by that I mean you actually moved your units in such a way that you would have been better off if you had just A-moved. So I anti-micro my forces here. These Widow Mines get pretty decent connections, dying to the banelings in the process, and it looks like, okay, I lost my units, but I killed most of his at least, but once these reinforcing lings show up, this just starts to become very painful to watch. I'm going to just go ahead and speed through the rest of this game, just because I know that you probably want to see exactly how it ended, even though, like I mentioned, this game ended quite a while ago. It ended at 12 minutes, not at 16:55 when I typed GG. You can see that this just looks so unbelievably one-sided. Like I never even had any kind of chance. And you know what? After I lost my army here, I never did have any kind of chance. And I knew that even while playing this game. I was basically hoping that my opponent would make some sort of huge mistake, which he didn't. So once again, the thing I really want you to take away from this video is games are not always decided in the last few minutes of it. I think that, you know, a player who is perhaps a little newer, especially at analyzing their replays, would probably maybe even skip the entire game until about here, and then they'll be like, oh, okay, I guess like this must be when I lost the game. When he kills this army here, and then he just sends his lings over here and kills all my stuff. This is when I lost the game. When in reality, that's not the case at all. When we actually lost the game was a few minutes earlier. We lost the game earlier than that. Come on. I do wish the replay system was better, instead of having to basically guess what time you want it to be, but we'll learn to deal with it. So here, everything's fine at this point. It's anyone's game. Once I make this mistake, the game's over. I've lost. This is when I truly lost the game. Not at this big battle that occurred around here. Not when he started flooding units into my main and my natural. When I lost the army here. That's when I lost the game. So let's recap what we learned today. The first thing we learned is when analyzing your replays, unless you're trying to learn a new build, or unless you got cheesed, you can go ahead and feel free to skip to sometime between 6 and 8 minutes in the replay. We also learned to don't get tunnel visioned. Just because there's one possibility and it seems more likely to you, that doesn't mean that you should basically blind yourselves to all of the other possibilities. I saw this hatchery being taken late. I thought, you must be doing some kind of aggression to me, to the point where even when I scanned his base and saw everything was perfectly normal, I thought, oh, you must be trying to deceive me, instead of what I should have actually thought, which is, oh, I guess he took this base late for some other reason and he is playing normal. We also learned to not just throw away units. I threw away these Hellions for no reason. I lost this army here for no reason. I effectively lost the army that was here for no reason. Imagine if, when the engagement at my third happened, if I had all of those units instead, or if I had actually gotten decent trades with those units instead of having them just get annihilated for almost free. And the last, and possibly most important thing we learned, is that if you are a Terran player, never ever ever step on the Zerg's creep. Alright, thank you very much for watching. That wraps up this episode of Let's Learn with Limbic, and I will see you all next time.